In cities that never sleep, where steel towers pierce the clouds and neon lights drown the stars, the spirits do not rest. Beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, behind elevator doors that open too slowly, and in mirrors that reflect more than just your face, the old world still lingers. Welcome to Ghosts of Asia, where modern life meets ancient horror, and the dead walk silently beside the living. Each story we tell is rooted in whispers, real tales passed down through alleyways, shrines, and funeral smoke. Tonight's story is not about monsters hiding in the woods. It's about something far closer, something waiting behind closed doors. An apartment that watches you sleep. An elevator that stops on a floor that doesn't exist. And a man who stepped out, only to find himself still standing inside. This is The Elevator Stops on 14, a modern haunting buried beneath tradition, silence, and spiritual debt. Turn off the lights, and whatever you do, don't look too long into the mirror. The morning was gray when Jae-hyun arrived at the entrance of Hwarong Tower, a brand new high-rise in eastern Seoul. The clouds hung low, brushing against the upper floors, as if the sky itself was reluctant to look too closely. The glass facade reflected a distorted image of the city, shimmering, bending, unreal. He stood beside the moving truck, clutching the keys to Unit 13B in one hand and a paper bag of convenience store breakfast in the other. Everything he owned fit inside 12 cardboard boxes. No furniture, no plants, no family photos. Just like the way he liked it. 34, single, quiet. A middle manager in a mid-tier marketing firm. The kind of man who didn't raise suspicions if he didn't answer texts for days. He looked up at the building, 30 floors, steel and glass, polished to perfection. Yet there was something uninviting about it. Not hostile, just indifferent, as if the building had been waiting for someone like him. The doorman was an older man with hollow eyes and a stooped back. His name tag read Mr. Wu, though the W was nearly rubbed away. "You're the new tenant in 13B?" the doorman asked as he handed Jae-hyun a clipboard. "Yes, signed the lease last week." The man's eyes narrowed just slightly. Not many people stay long on 13. Jae-hyun gave a small chuckle. Because of the number? The old man didn't smile. "It's not just that." Jae-hyun hesitated. "What is it then?" The doorman paused as if choosing between lies and silence. Then he simply said, "Just keep your door locked, even if you're home." Jae-hyun blinked. Is the neighborhood unsafe? But the old man was already looking away. He chalked it up to superstition. Old men say old things. And besides, he'd lived in worse places. Cockroach-infested villas with water stains on the ceilings and neighbors who shouted through paper walls. This was an upgrade. Sterile, quiet, clean. Inside, the lobby smelled like lemon wax and ozone. A fake plant stood beside the elevator, its leaves dusted, but plastic. No music played, just the steady, low hum of electricity running through polished wires. He rolled his suitcase to the elevator and pressed the up button. Ding! The doors slid open, revealing a mirrored interior. As he stepped inside, he noticed something strange. The floor panel showed no 14th floor. 1, 2, 3, 12, 13, 15, 16. No 14. He'd heard of buildings skipping 4, especially in Korea and China, where the number sounded too much like death. But 14, that was new. Maybe a design choice? Maybe a glitch? Maybe nothing. He pressed 13. The elevator rose without incident, smooth, silent. When it stopped, the doors opened to reveal a hallway bathed in white light. Bright, cold LEDs hummed overhead. Everything was pristine, freshly painted. The doors were sleek, matte black with stainless steel numbers. 13A, 13B, 13C. His new home was at the far end. He fumbled with his keys, glanced briefly at the peephole just in case someone had left a welcome note or a parcel. But there was nothing. Just a faint smudge on the doorknob, like someone had touched it with wet fingers. Click. The door opened with a soft creak. The apartment was perfect, minimalistic, clean lines, the kind of space that could be anything, depending on who lived in it. Pale wooden floors, white walls, a small kitchen to the left, sliding doors leading to a bedroom just barely big enough for a mattress and wardrobe. He stepped inside and closed the door. Instantly, the air changed. Not temperature, just weight, as if the apartment had been holding its breath. He shook it off. Moving is stressful. Maybe he was just exhausted. He set his bags down, pulled out his phone, and texted his coworker. "Moved in. Place is fine. Thanks for the intro to the agent." No response yet. It was Sunday. Everyone else was probably out drinking. As he walked into the bedroom, he paused in front of the large mirror attached to the closet. It stretched from floor to ceiling, framed in cold silver. His reflection stared back at him, pale, underslept, wrinkled suit jacket still clinging to his frame. Something about the mirror bothered him. It wasn't warped, but the reflection lagged just slightly. He lifted his hand, the mirror followed. He tilted his head, the mirror followed. But when he turned to walk away, he could have sworn the reflection didn't move right away. He turned back quickly. Nothing. Perfectly normal. He shook his head and forced a laugh. "Get a grip, Jae-hyun." He unpacked for the next 2 hours, careful to place everything just so. He was the kind of man who needed order. Socks folded, cups stacked, bathroom supplies lined up like soldiers. By nightfall, he had everything in place. At precisely 9:45 p.m., he sat down on the floor with a microwave dinner and scrolled through his phone. Outside the windows, the lights of the city shimmered in the haze. The thrum of traffic far below sounded like the distant roar of an ocean. And then the elevator dinged. He froze. His apartment was far from the elevator, but the sound, it echoed unnaturally, as if the shaft was directly behind his walls. He waited. Silence. Then a soft shuffle, like bare feet on linoleum, passed down the hallway. He stood and pressed his ear to the door. Nothing. Still, he turned the bolt lock, just in case. That night, he had dreams of mirrors, endless corridors of himself walking in different directions. One of the reflections wasn't him. It had the same face, the same eyes, but no mouth. The next morning arrived with bleached sunlight and an empty silence that clung to the apartment like morning fog. Jae-hyun awoke not to the sound of traffic or alarms or notifications, but to nothing. The kind of silence that makes you question if you're awake at all. He sat up on the mattress on the floor, blinked, and stared at the ceiling. The digital clock beside him read 7:04 a.m., but outside the bedroom window, the world looked still, like a paused frame in a video. He stood, wandered toward the kitchen, and brewed instant coffee while glancing at his phone. No missed calls, no new messages, not even spam. He opened his email. Nothing refreshed. The Wi-Fi icon blinked normally, full bars. Still, something felt off. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than it should be. The fluorescent kitchen light buzzed intermittently, and as he sipped his coffee, a strange, creeping sensation settled into his spine. Not fear exactly, more like dissonance, like he had missed something important while blinking. He shook it off and dressed for work. Black slacks, gray shirt, hair neatly parted, no cologne. He liked to disappear in crowds, and at the office, invisibility was rewarded with peace. By 8:20, he was at the elevator. He pressed the call button and waited. Ding! The doors opened. He stepped inside. Just like yesterday, the interior was a mirror box, cool-toned, empty, and too clean. But today, something tugged at his attention. The floor panel. He stared at it longer than necessary. There was no 14. He knew this. He'd seen it yesterday. But today, it bothered him, more than it should. A missing number shouldn't feel like a missing tooth in reality. He looked closer. 1, 2, 3, 12, 13, 15, 16. No 14. Just a blank space where it should be. A gap between 13 and 15. Not even a placeholder button. Just empty air. His finger hovered over G, ground, but as he was about to press it, the elevator jolted. It wasn't a harsh movement, more like a subtle lurch, as if the whole shaft had sighed beneath his feet. The lights flickered, not dramatically, just a small, nearly imperceptible hiccup. And then, without him pressing anything, the elevator began to descend. He froze. The digital display above flicked numbers in reverse. 13, 12, 11. He looked at the panel. None of the buttons were lit. He hadn't touched the thing. At floor 7, the descent slowed, then stopped. Ding! The doors opened. Empty hallway. Dimly lit, dusty tiles. The walls bore no apartment numbers, just concrete and silence. This floor wasn't finished. It looked abandoned. He hadn't pressed 7. He didn't step out. The doors remained open for a full 10 seconds before closing themselves with a soft, reluctant sigh. He stared at his own face in the mirrored walls, pale, still, just watching himself be taken somewhere. When he finally reached the ground floor, the doorman was standing nearby, hunched and unmoving like a statue waiting for purpose. Jae-hyun stepped out. Mr. Woo turned slowly. Did it stop? What? The elevator. Jae-hyun blinked. Yeah, on 7. The old man frowned, lips tightening. It shouldn't. I know. You didn't press anything? No. The old man grunted, almost to himself. It likes the quiet ones. He didn't know what that meant, and he didn't ask. He just walked briskly through the glass doors, out into the morning glare, and boarded the bus with one headphone in and no music playing. He needed to hear the city, the cars, the people. He needed proof he was still part of the world. The office was no different than usual, a beige box filled with overworked people pretending not to notice one another. The cubicles were lined with motivational posters about synergy and results. The air conditioning was always too cold or not working at all. But today the noise felt comforting. Even the fake laughs in the break room were oddly reassuring. At 1:23 p.m. during a lull, he pulled out his phone and searched, "No 14th floor Korea superstition." Hundreds of results appeared. Tetraphobia, the fear of the number 4, common in East Asia. Elevators often skip 4, 14, and even 24. But 14 specifically? One forum post caught his eye. Some buildings skip 14 because 1-4 sounds like want death. Ilsa is ilsa mang, a play on want to die. But there's more. Some say the 14th floor is spiritually open, a space where the boundaries are thinner. If an old building gets renovated into a high-rise and the land was cursed or desecrated, that missing floor becomes a hiding place for things that shouldn't still be here. He stared at the post for a long moment, then locked his phone and got back to work. But that night, the elevator stopped again. He returned home late after staying behind to avoid traffic. The building was quieter than usual, almost empty. As he stepped into the elevator, he checked the panel again. Still, no 14. But as the elevator began to rise, he saw something flicker in the display above. 1, 2, 3, 13, 14, 15. It was there, just for a second, like a blink. He stared at it, unsure. Had he imagined it? When he arrived at the 13th floor, everything looked the same. Lights, doors, silence. He walked to his unit, paused briefly in front of 13B. The doorknob was wet. Again. No rain, no condensation, just a smear. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale. Not like food gone bad, but like an old drawer opened after years of being shut. He sniffed, the faintest trace of incense. Had he burned anything? No. He checked the windows, all locked. The lights turned on normally, the TV too. No signs of break-in. But when he entered the bedroom, he stopped. The mirror had changed. The corners were blackened. Not charred, just darker than they should be, like shadow had pooled there. He approached it slowly, and as he stared into the mirror, he realized the reflection wasn't quite right. The apartment behind him looked the same, but he didn't. His clothes were off by a thread, his expression wrong, his eyes emptier. He raised his hand. The reflection followed, but slower this time. Half a second too late. He stepped back. So did it. But it smiled. He did not. The smile vanished as quickly as it came, as if erased it itself. He backed away, heart thumping hard. The lights flickered once, and then everything returned to normal. That night he couldn't sleep. The apartment was too quiet. His skin itched. His eyes stung. At exactly 3:14 a.m., he woke suddenly, not sure why. No noise, no dreams, just a feeling. He stepped out of bed and wandered into the living room. The apartment felt unfamiliar, like someone had rearranged the atoms when he wasn't looking. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway outside was dark. The motion sensor lights didn't activate. But at the very edge of the peephole's curve, he saw something move. Just a shadow. Then nothing. He waited another 10 seconds, then bolted the lock again and whispered to himself, "No one's out there." But in the mirror across the room, his reflection's lips were still moving. The following day was a Thursday. Though Jae-yoon found it hard to tell, the days were starting to blend. He had begun to forget simple things, whether he had eaten, what time he went to sleep, the last conversation he had at work. His coworkers noticed too. That morning, his supervisor commented on his silence in meetings, asking if he was unwell. Jae-yoon could only nod, unable to explain the weight that had settled inside him. Not depression, not stress, something heavier, something that followed him into the light. He left work before sundown, telling himself he needed rest, but in truth, he was afraid of what the building would be like after dark. He reached Hwarang Tower just as the sun dipped below the skyline. Shadows stretched long across the pavement, and the glass exterior of the building looked wrong, like it was absorbing light instead of reflecting it. He hesitated in front of the revolving door, then stepped inside. The lobby was dimmer than usual, or maybe the bulbs were flickering again. Mr. Wu, the doorman, wasn't at his post. The security desk sat empty, the monitor screens showing static. The air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like old blood. He pressed the up button for the elevator. Ding! The doors opened. Too fast, too smooth. He stepped inside. Alone again. The mirrored walls greeted him with his now familiar stranger of a reflection. He reached for the 13 button, but paused. Something compelled him. He hovered his finger above the blank space between 13 and 15. There was no button for 14, but his hand moved as if there was. He tapped the empty panel. To his surprise, the elevator dinged in acknowledgement and began to ascend. His heart thudded once, then again harder. The digital display ticked upward. 10, 11, 12, 13. It did not stop. 14. The number appeared, clear, glowing red. Then the elevator stopped. Ding! The door slid open. The hallway beyond was familiar. Too familiar. It was his hallway. But not quite. The lights were dimmer, flickering. The wallpaper was slightly different, an older pattern yellowed with age. The air felt still, unmoving, like a room sealed too long. And at the far end, he saw it. His door. 13B. He stepped out. It felt like walking into a dream that might become nightmare at any moment. Every step echoed louder than it should. The floor creaked beneath his weight, even though it was concrete. He stopped in front of the door. The numbers were the same, 1, 3, B, but they looked hand-painted. The paint was chipped. There were scratch marks around the doorknob, like fingernails had dug into it. He reached out. The handle was ice cold, and it turned, without resistance. The door creaked open. The apartment was his. The same layout, same walls, same furniture, same arrangement of toothbrushes and coffee mugs, but muted, grayed out, lifeless. Like someone had copied his apartment from memory but forgotten what color the world was supposed to be. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him, on its own. The silence was unbearable. He reached for the light switch. Nothing. He stepped slowly into the living room. His feet left no sound on the floor. He passed the couch, the coffee table, the half-used candle he hadn't lit in weeks. All in the right place, all perfectly still. He paused in front of the mirror in the bedroom, and for the first time, he realized there was no reflection. The glass was there, the frame, but it was pitch black, like a window into something deeper, a chasm. He leaned closer. His own breath fogged up the glass, and then Something moved, a faint shape. At first, he thought it was his reflection catching up, but then it stepped forward. Not him, a man, same height, same build, same face, but the eyes were hollow, the skin was gray, the corners of the mouth twitched slightly upward. The mirror man raised a hand and knocked once on his side of the glass. Jae-yoon stumbled backward. The knock echoed, not from the glass, but from the wall behind him. He turned, and the mirror was normal again. His own reflection stared back, pale, sweating, breathing hard. He rushed to the front door. It wouldn't open, no matter how hard he pulled. He pounded on it, shouting, but the sound was muted, like he was screaming into fabric. Then he heard it. Footsteps from inside the apartment. Not his. He turned slowly and saw his other self emerging from the bedroom. The figure was grinning now, eyes wide, the skin stretched too tightly across the face. Jae-yoon backed away. The other one mimicked every movement, not simultaneously, but predictively, like it knew what Jae-yoon was going to do next. He lunged for the window. It wouldn't open either. Outside, the world was wrong. The buildings across the street were melted at the edges. Lights flickered in unnatural rhythms. A car drove in reverse, headlights off. The figure stepped closer and closer. Jae-yoon shut his eyes. He whispered, "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" He opened them again, and he was back in the elevator. Alone, breathing hard. The doors were closed, and the floor display read 13. He blinked. Had it all been a dream? He stumbled out onto his floor. Everything was normal. Fluorescent lights, clean walls, the faint smell of air freshener. His door stood at the end of the hallway. Clean, untouched. He unlocked it with shaking hands and rushed inside. Everything was where he left it, except the mirror in the bedroom was cracked. Just a thin fracture. But it hadn't been there before. That night he didn't sleep. He sat on the floor, back to the wall, staring at the mirror until sunrise. And somewhere around 3:14 a.m., he thought he heard it again. A single knock. But not from the mirror this time. From inside the closet. Jae-yoon didn't open the closet that night. He stared at the door for hours, unmoving, his back pressed against the far wall of the bedroom. His body was tense, every muscle tight and aching, but he didn't dare shift. The knock had been soft, barely audible, yet somehow louder than any scream could have been. He waited and waited, but no second knock came. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the blinds, painting long slashes across the floor, only then did he allow himself to move. He crept across the room, avoiding the mirror, and pressed an ear gently to the closet door. Silence. No breathing. No footsteps. Just the faint hum of the building's plumbing, like distant voices underwater. He slowly opened it. Inside, nothing. His clothes, a box of old receipts, 2 pairs of shoes neatly lined up. Nothing out of place. But the air inside the closet felt wrong. Not cold, but thin, as if the oxygen had been drained out during the night. He didn't touch anything. He simply closed the door again and walked barefoot to the bathroom. He washed his face 3 times, trying to snap himself back into something resembling reality. When he looked up into the bathroom mirror, he expected to see his own face, exhausted and pale. Instead, He saw the man from the night before. Same face, same hair, same skin. But this one was smiling, faintly, subtly, almost gently. Not the kind of smile you give to strangers, the kind of smile you give when you've been waiting. Jae-yoon didn't scream. He just backed away slowly, refusing to turn his back to the mirror. The reflection stood still. Then, just before he stepped out of the bathroom, the reflection blinked with the wrong eye. That day, he didn't go to work. He called in sick, voice barely above a whisper. His supervisor didn't push. Jae-yoon never called in sick. That alone was warning enough. He stayed home, curtains drawn, lights off. But the apartment no longer felt like his. The floor creaked in places it never had. The refrigerator motor made strange choking noises, like something trying to clear its throat. The faucet in the kitchen dripped, despite being tightly shut. Every time he passed the bedroom mirror, he caught glimpses of movement, not his, a figure behind him. And when he turned, there was never anything there. He took his phone and tried recording a video of the mirror, but the footage came out wrong, distorted, streaked with static. His own voice on the recording sounded different, more strained, higher pitched, almost pleading. He deleted the file and turned his phone off. By late afternoon, something else began to change. People stopped responding. He texted 3 friends, casual messages, nothing about ghosts or hallucinations, just, "Hey, have you ever seen weird stuff in elevators?" No reply. He called his coworker, Young-soo, who had recommended the apartment complex in the first place. Straight to voicemail. He checked his company group chat. He was no longer in it. Not removed, just absent, as if he had never been added in the first place. He scrolled through his contacts. Half of them were missing. He checked his reflection again. It still followed his movements, mostly, but now it didn't blink at all. That evening, just before sunset, he stood on his balcony to get some air. The world outside was still intact. Cars moved, people walked, lights flicked on in the distance, but everything felt too quiet, muted, like watching a simulation on low volume. And then he saw something. Across the street, on the rooftop of the building opposite his, a figure stood perfectly still. He squinted. The figure wore his clothes, had his posture, and it was staring directly at him. He stepped back into his apartment, heart pounding. His phone buzzed. A notification. New message. Unknown number. Don't ignore it. It knows you now. His fingers trembled as he typed back, "Who are you?" No reply. Just 3 blinking dots that never finished the message. He turned the phone off again and sat down on the floor, knees pulled to his chest. The mirror in the bedroom reflected the darkening room, and in it he saw movement. His reflection walked away, even though he was sitting still. That night, he didn't sleep in the bedroom. He made a bed on the floor of the living room, away from mirrors, away from reflections. But just as he began to drift into exhausted half-consciousness, the elevator dinged. He sat bolt upright. The sound was faint but unmistakable. He looked at the clock. 3:14 a.m. Of course. He crept to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit, empty. But then, the lights began to flicker, and at the far end, the elevator doors slid open. From inside stepped a figure, same build, same posture, and it walked, slowly, deliberately, straight toward apartment 13B. Jae-yoon stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. He heard nothing. No footsteps. No knocks. He waited, breath frozen in his lungs. Then, a single knock, but not at the door, at the bathroom mirror. He turned and saw his reflection staring back, eyes now solid black, mouth opening slowly, silently. Inside the reflection's mouth, something moved. A shadow. A second face. The next morning, he was different. Quieter. More measured. He brewed coffee, dressed for work, and packed his bag like everything was fine. But when he looked in the mirror, the real one, there were two reflections now. One standing slightly behind him, smiling.
For 3 days, Jae-hyun lived like a man pretending to be himself. He got up at the same time every morning, brewed the same bitter coffee, wore the same clothes to the same job, but he no longer felt in his life. He was watching it, enacting it, mimicking what a human being should do. The difference was subtle, but absolute. In the mirror, his reflection still moved, but the timing was always off. Not just delayed, staggered, like it was guessing what came next and occasionally getting it wrong. Sometimes it blinked too late. Sometimes not at all. Sometimes it didn't blink for hours. He started leaving the lights on overnight. He bought a cheap lamp for the hallway and left it burning even when he left for work. He placed post-it notes on his mirrors that read, "That's not you." By now, he no longer questioned what was happening. He knew there was something living in his reflection, and it wanted out. On the 5th morning, he noticed the first scratch, a long, thin mark on the inside of his front door, about waist-high, not gouged, more like etched by a fingernail or a knife tip. It hadn't been there before. He crouched to examine it. The groove curved inward at the end, like a question mark. He touched it. The groove was wet, not sticky, not paint, something thinner. When he pulled his hand away, a faint red smear followed. He rushed to the bathroom to wash it off, but the moment he turned on the tap, the mirror behind the sink fogged, even though the water wasn't hot. And in the misted surface, a message appeared. "Let me out." He didn't move for a long time. At work, his co-workers no longer looked him in the eye. His name had vanished from the team directory. Emails he sent never got replies. He called the tech department to ask about it. They told him, "No employee named Park Jae-hyun is listed at your branch." He asked for HR. They told him, "You must be mistaken, sir. We've never had that name on our records." He hung up, went to the break room, looked in the mirror above the sink, and for the first time, his reflection didn't appear at all. That night, when he returned home, the scratches had multiplied. They were on the door frame, the kitchen tiles, the outer rim of the bedroom mirror. Thin, claw-like marks, as if something had been trying to crawl through. He covered the mirrors with black fabric. He taped the edges with heavy-duty duct tape. But when he turned out the lights, even briefly, he would hear it. Scratching. Soft. Constant. Like nails against wood. From inside the walls. He pulled the covers over his head like a child and waited for morning. The next day, he walked into a convenience store to buy bottled water and ramen. The cashier stared at him, unblinking, and said, "You have 2 shadows." He froze. "What?" The boy pointed. "There's yours." He pointed again. "And that one." He turned. There were 2 shadows. One followed his body. The other stood still. He dropped his items and ran out of the store. At home, he opened his closet for the first time in days. Inside was a mirror. He didn't remember putting it there. It leaned against the back wall, half covered by a jacket. And in it, his double. Closer now. Skin darker, as if decaying. Veins spider-webbed beneath the surface. The eyes were all wrong. Human-shaped, but animal in intent. Watching. Jae-hyun slammed the closet shut. He pushed a chair in front of it, taped the edges, then checked the mirror in the hallway, the one near the door. This one was normal, for now. But in the reflection, the hallway behind him looked longer than it should have been, as if the apartment had quietly grown behind his back. That night he dreamed of the elevator again, only this time it didn't stop on 13. It went past 14, past 15, into numbers that didn't exist. -1, -4, -13. Each time the doors opened, he saw flashes. A woman with black eyes crawling across the ceiling. A room full of mirrors, each one covered in blood. A version of himself, naked, mouth sewn shut, eyes weeping black fluid. He screamed, but no sound came out. His throat was dry, too dry. He stumbled into the bathroom, turned on the faucet. Nothing. He looked in the mirror, still covered in cloth. But something behind the fabric was moving, breathing. He could see it in the way the cloth pulsed gently. In, out, in, out. He turned off the light and walked away, and heard, behind him, the sound of breathing continue. The scratches became symbols, not random anymore. They began to form patterns, curves, circles, intersecting lines, runes he didn't recognize but instinctively knew weren't meant to be seen. He took photos, but on his phone screen the symbols moved, rearranged themselves. He deleted the pictures immediately, but one reappeared in his gallery, titled, "You're Almost Ready." He stopped leaving the apartment. He unplugged his phone, blocked the peephole, closed the blinds, and still the lights would flicker at 3:14 a.m. Still the scratching would resume. Still the double in the mirror would grow closer. And then, one night, something changed. The mirror in the hallway, the one he hadn't yet covered, shattered from the inside. Not cracked, exploded. Shards flew outward in perfect symmetry, and from within it he heard a voice, not a whisper, not a growl, but his own voice saying, "I'm here now." He turned to run, but the apartment was different. The walls were closer. The hallway was longer. His own room had rearranged itself, the bed now pushed against a wall that didn't exist yesterday. And at the end of the hallway stood a door, one he had never seen before, etched with hundreds of tiny scratch marks. He stepped toward it, hand trembling, reached for the knob. It turned, and behind it, only a mirror. But not just any mirror. This one didn't reflect him at all. It reflected his back, and in that reflection, a figure stood behind him, reaching for his shoulders. The apartment was no longer just haunted. It was awake. Each night brought new changes, walls where there were none before, hallways that grew longer, shadows that didn't match his movements. The electricity flickered without cause. The water ran dark for seconds before clearing.
Even his food tasted different, metallic, like it had been sitting in someone else's mouth before reaching his. Jae-shun no longer trusted any of his senses. But the mirrors, they were constant. Even covered, he felt them watching. Even broken, he saw movement where there should have been none. And the reflection, the double, now mimicked him with such disturbing accuracy that it was no longer clear who was mimicking whom. He knew he was running out of time. One evening, after yet another message appeared in the fogged glass, "You will fade soon," he reached for his coat and walked out of the apartment for the first time in days. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to find someone who could explain what was happening. Someone who knew the old ways, the things people didn't talk about anymore. He found her through a thread on an obscure Korean forum, buried between posts about haunted houses and spirit traps. The users called her Halmani Hwa, a shaman known for helping the spirit sick when doctors failed. She lived in a rusting Hanok-style house pressed between two apartment blocks in Mapo, as if the city had tried to crush her but failed. Jae-shun stood at her gate, heart pounding, the late autumn wind cutting into his coat. The wooden sign above the gate was faded, but still legible. "Those who see the other side are already halfway there." He rang the small bell once. She answered immediately, as if she had been standing behind the door all along. She was old, bent, her hair pure white and braided back. Her eyes were clouded, but they didn't feel blind. If anything, they felt like they saw too much. "You're late," she said, voice dry but steady. "I didn't make an appointment." "You were expected anyway." Inside, the house smelled of burning herbs, wax, and earth. The walls were lined with talismans, red paper with black ink symbols, tiny bells, and mirrors with strings of red thread across them. A drum sat in the corner, beside an altar covered in rice, incense, and chicken bones. She motioned for him to sit on the mat. He hesitated, then did. She studied him for a long time without speaking, then said, "You've crossed over." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "You stepped through a door, into a space that was not meant for the living." "I didn't mean to." "Intention is irrelevant to spirits." She poured tea that smelled of dried mushrooms and salt. He didn't drink. "Tell me what you saw," she said. And so he did. He told her everything. The mirror that lagged, the double that smiled, the floor that didn't exist, the door that opened to nowhere, the messages, the dreams, the knock. She didn't interrupt. She didn't blink. When he finished, she placed a hand on his chest. Her skin was cold and dry like pressed paper. "There is a gate beneath your heart," she murmured, "and it is open." She stood and pulled a heavy cloth from the wall, revealing an ancient mirror, old bronze, stained with time, rimmed with carvings of dragons and teeth. She lit a candle and placed it between him and the mirror. "Look," she said. He did. At first, he saw only his own tired reflection. Then, a second face appeared behind him. The double, grinning, closer than ever. Its hand reached for his shoulder, and this time he felt it, a cold pressure, real. He gasped and pulled away. The candle sputtered out. Halmoni Hwan nodded grimly. "It has touched you." "What is it?" he whispered. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the altar and took out a faded book wrapped in cloth. She laid it gently before him. Inside were pages of hand-painted diagrams, mirror rituals, binding spells, banishment rites. She flipped to one page and tapped the illustration. It showed a man standing in front of a mirror, his face distorted. Behind the mirror, a second man, identical, reaching through. "Your building," she said, "was built on sealed land. There was once a shrine there, not one of the nice ones, a gate for wandering souls. The ground was used by a spirit shaman to trap lost things. When the shrine was demolished, the ritual was broken. The spirits had no tether. They scattered until one of the architects foolishly mirrored the structure." "The apartment tower?" She nodded. "And the elevator acts like a spine, connecting the real and the false floor." 14. Not a real floor, not in this world, but it's there now, a space between, thin, hungry. "And I went in." "You didn't just go in. You looked too long. That's all it takes." She prepared a ritual, fast, urgent. She wrapped a red string around his wrist, placed ash across his forehead, lit 7 candles, and placed a mirror at each direction of the compass. In the center, she drew a symbol with salt and crushed bone. "Don't speak," she told him. She began to chant, soft at first, then louder, rhythmic. A drumbeat joined, slow, steady. The air in the room thickened. The candle flame stretched sideways, and in every mirror the double appeared, each one at a different stage of decay. Jae-shun sat still as she struck the drum harder, chanted faster. The mirrors rattled. One cracked, another wept blood from its corner. Then came the shriek, high-pitched, human, but wrong. The lights blew out. The chanting stopped. The room was pitch black. When she lit a single candle again, the mirrors were empty. The double was gone. For now. She turned to him, sweat pouring down her face. "You must finish what the first shaman started," she said, "or you'll fade completely." "How?" She handed him a folded note. Inside were 7 ritual steps. She pointed at the last one. "Seal the false floor from within." "You're telling me to go back?" he asked. She nodded. "It let you in. It marked you. That means it will open again." "And if I fail?" "You won't come back, but something else will." He left her house just after midnight. The city was silent. The streetlights flickered behind him as he walked. He didn't look at his reflection in the windows, not once. The building no longer pretended to be normal, not to Jae-yun, and now not to others either. It began with a maintenance request. An elderly resident on the 12th floor had complained of a terrible stench near the elevator shaft, something wet, rotting. Management assumed a dead rat, a busted pipe, or maybe spoiled food dropped into a service vent. But the smell persisted for days. And then, the elevator began to malfunction. It stuttered between 13 and 15, jerked once violently, got stuck for 30 minutes while a young mother and her toddler screamed inside. An inspection was ordered. The maintenance team, 2 men in gray uniforms and thick gloves, pried open the thin slit between floors 13 and 15. What they found wasn't a rat. It was a body, wedged between floors. The news didn't make headlines. The building manager called the police, who quietly swept the case under a rug woven from embarrassment and bribes. The official story: a suicide victim, likely an intruder or a squatter who had climbed into the elevator shaft during construction. The body had mummified, they said. Time and heat had preserved it unnaturally. They didn't mention the red thread wrapped around its torso, or the symbols carved into its chest, or the fact that there was no record of any missing worker matching the remains. But Jae-yun knew better. He overheard the cleaning staff whispering in the stairwell. He saw the photos before they were deleted from the online forum. The corpse's face had been partially crushed by the mechanical break, but one eye remained intact, wide open, and in its dead pupil, a reflection. Jae-yun stood at the elevator doors that night, staring at the space between the buttons. He didn't press anything. Still, the elevator opened. He stepped inside. The interior lights flickered. The mirrored walls vibrated faintly, like sound was traveling just beneath the surface. He did not touch the panel. The elevator rose. 10, 11, 12, 13. Then it slowed. It didn't stop at 14, not this time. It stopped between floors. The lights dimmed, and the walls began to sweat. Droplets forming on the glass, trickling down, streaking through the reflections. The temperature dropped. The open to blackness. And in the dark, a single hanging foot, suspended by red thread, swinging slightly. He slammed the door close button. The doors shuddered, resisted, then finally shut. The elevator groaned and rose to 15. When it opened again, the hallway was empty, but his hands were wet, and the scent of dried blood and salt clung to his jacket. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on the floor of his living room, the shaman's instructions beside him, a circle of salt forming the only barrier between him and the growing noise behind the walls. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the scratching resumed. But this time, it was not gentle. It was violent, frantic. Something was trying to claw its way through. He placed his hand against the wall. It was vibrating, rhythmic, almost like drumming. The next morning, the elevator was out of order. Jae-yun took the stairs to work. His legs ached by the 7th floor. He felt dizzy by the 10th. On the landing between floors 13 and 14, he paused. There wasn't supposed to be a landing. But here it was, a door, sealed with rusted iron and no handle. Etched into the metal, only the bound may open. And beneath it, something scratched recently. He is already walking. He stared at the words for a long time, then continued upward, refusing to look at his reflection in the stairwell window. But in the glass, 2 sets of footsteps followed. That day, the building staff held a quiet meeting with the residents. "We are undergoing renovations," they said. "You may hear construction noises." But the residents weren't stupid. They whispered among themselves. The widow in 15A had seen a man in her bathroom mirror she didn't recognize. The young woman in 12C had found muddy footprints inside her locked apartment. Someone had torn all the mirrors off the walls in the lobby. And worst of all, a child had gone missing from the 4th floor. She was found in the basement stairwell hours later, unhurt but covered in dust and crying, repeating one phrase, "The man in the wall wanted to come with me." That night, Jae-yun received a package, no return address, wrapped in black cloth. Inside, a mirror shard bound in red thread, and a note scrawled in jagged ink. "You are the gate. You were always the gate." He began to piece it together. The building was cursed, yes, but more than that, unfinished. The original shaman who tried to seal the spirits within the mirror realm had died during the ritual. The body found between the floors, it wasn't just a corpse, it was the shaman, sealed into the gap, bound by red thread, marked with protection sigils, holding the door shut with his own soul. But over time, with the shrine demolished, the rituals forgotten, and the residents neglecting their ancestral rites, the seal weakened. And when Jae-yeon had stepped on the 14th floor that didn't exist, he had broken what was left of it. Now, the spirits were waking up, and his reflection, the double, was merely the first to slip through. Halmonihua sent him a final message that night. "You must finish what he started, or the false floor will become permanent, and the spirits inside it will walk free." As he sat in his living room, every light turned on, mirrors covered, salt kirkle restored, Jae-yeon realized the awful truth. He wasn't just being haunted, he was being used. His body, his identity, was the replacement key. The double wasn't trying to become him, it was trying to step through him. Jae-hyun had always believed that mirrors reflected reality. Now he wasn't so sure, because lately the reflections weren't just watching, they were learning. They were mimicking him more perfectly than he mimicked himself. It began with small things. He would pass the mirror and feel a delay, then look again and see himself already walking away. He would brush his teeth and see out of the corner of his eye the reflection using a different hand. Sometimes he would laugh, bitter, humorless, and in the mirror, the other Jae-hyun would not. At first, he told himself it was fatigue, but then it got worse. The first undeniable moment came one cold morning at 6:12 a.m. He stood at the kitchen counter, pouring hot water into instant noodles, steam fogging the air. His apartment windows faced another high-rise across the street. Dozens of units, most identical. At this hour, lights were beginning to blink on. Blue TV glows, bathroom fluorescents, kitchen spotlights. As he stirred the noodles, something in the corner of his vision made him pause. One of the opposite units, directly aligned with his, had a man standing at the window. Nothing strange until he looked closer. The man was him. Same hoodie, same posture, same bowl of noodles, same timing. As Jae-hyun slowly reached to close the blinds, the man in the other apartment did the same, frame by frame, perfectly mirrored. His breath caught. He waved, just once, and across the street, his double did not wave back. It simply watched. He stopped looking out the window after that. The apartment began to feel too sentient. Every object, every mirror, every surface started to behave like an eye, watching, recording, echoing things back with subtle distortions. One night, he walked past the hallway and saw himself standing inside the bathroom, even though he hadn't gone in. Another night, he left the bedroom lights off and saw light leaking out from under the mirror's edges, as though the mirror was lit behind the glass. Once, when he whispered a prayer, trembling, desperate, the echo whispered back something entirely different. He said, "God help me." The echo replied, You're not his to save. He taped every mirror, smashed the bathroom one, wrapped the hallway glass in black cloth, but the apartment didn't care. It found other ways to watch. He unplugged his TV. It turned on anyway. He muted his phone. It spoke in his voice. At one point, he saw a pop-up ad on a website he never visited. It showed a photo of his bedroom, with two people sleeping in his bed. One was him. The other had no face. The paranoia deepened. But it wasn't just that he was being watched. It was that something else was acting like him and doing it better. At work, someone responded to emails using his name. His co-workers swore they had meetings with him, meetings he never attended. His building manager said he received his rent in person, a payment Jae-hyun had not yet made. Worst of all, he received a voice message from his mother. "You sound so strange these days, Jae-hyun. You called me last night, didn't you? Why didn't you say goodbye before hanging up?" He hadn't called her in weeks. He checked the phone. The call log said he had, at 3:14 a.m. He began testing himself. He left post-it notes with random questions only he could answer. He recorded himself sleeping. In the morning, the notes were rearranged, some answered, some missing. The footage? Gone, replaced by static, and for 1 second, a single frame of a man sitting on his chest, smiling. He tried to leave the apartment for good, packed a bag, walked to the door, turned the knob. It didn't open. He tried again and again. The bolt was undone. There was no lock, but the door wouldn't budge, like it was part of the wall now. Then, behind him, footsteps. Slow, barefoot. He turned, nobody there, but in the mirror-covered closet, the door now ajar, a shape crouched low inside, breathing, smiling. He pushed the furniture in front of the closet, nailed the window shut, slept on the floor with the lights on. But even with his eyes closed, he could feel it. The apartment was alive, and it was learning how to be him, better than he could. One morning, he opened the fridge to find a cup of coffee already made, steam still rising. He hadn't brewed it. He picked it up. It smelled just right, exactly how he liked it. On the cup, someone had written, "You forgot how you take it." I remembered. That night, the mirror in the hallway cracked again. Just a single line. But when he looked at it in the dark, the crack looked like a smile. He turned the light on. The crack was gone. At 3:14 a.m., the elevator dinged. He didn't leave the apartment, but he heard footsteps in the hallway. And then, a sound on the other side of his door. Keys jangling, turning, unlocking. The handle moved, but the door didn't open because he was already inside. He waited until morning, then walked slowly to the front door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, someone had placed a single item, a small handheld mirror, face down, tied with red thread. And when he turned it over, he saw not his face, but the others, closer, smiling, and behind it, the apartment he lived in, except older, dirtier, as if it had existed long before him, and would continue existing after he was gone.
Jaehan didn't remember falling asleep. He only remembered waking, if it could be called that, sitting upright on the cold living room floor, his body sore, his hands clenched into fists. Outside the windows, the sky was black. The digital clock read 3:14 a.m. Of course. He stood. The apartment no longer whispered. It waited. Quiet. Expectant. Like it knew he was ready. The ritual instructions from Halmeni Hua lay in front of him, the page now yellowed, though only days old. The red string tied around his wrist had faded to a dull brown. He picked up the note. Only 2 steps remained uncompleted. Return to the false floor. Seal it from within. His heart beat slowly, deliberately. Not with fear now, but with resolve. He crossed the room, pushed aside the furniture blocking the door, and stepped into the hallway. It was darker than it should have been. The overhead lights were flickering, not irregularly, but in perfect rhythm. A slow pulse, like a heartbeat, like breathing. The elevator stood at the end of the corridor, waiting, its doors already open. Jaehan entered the elevator without hesitation. The air was thick inside, humid. It smelled of rust, dust, and old incense. The mirrored walls were covered in condensation, beads of water trickling down as if the elevator itself was sweating. He looked at the panel. Still no button for 14. Just 13, 15, and between them, nothing. He reached forward and pressed the blank space between the buttons. His finger didn't click anything, but the elevator shuddered. The doors closed, and the display blinked to life. 13, 14. It stayed on 14. The elevator stopped. Ding! The doors opened. This time, he did not hesitate. He stepped out. And the air changed. It was colder here, not freezing, but absent of warmth. The hallway was identical to his, same layout, same proportions, but not clean. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips. Mold gathered around the ceiling corners. The light fixtures blinked in slow, eerie rhythm. And the silence wasn't silence. It was the hum of something sleeping just beneath the surface of the walls. The floor numbers on the wall were missing. No 14. No anything. But this was it. He knew it. The mirror floor. He walked toward what should have been his apartment, 13B, though no number adorned the door. It was warped, swollen with moisture. The handle was rusted, bent. He touched it. It crumbled in his hand. The door creaked open without pressure. And inside was his apartment, twisted and wrong. The furniture was the same, but rotting. The wallpaper pulsed. The floor was damp. The couch was stained with something dark, and the fridge door hung open, filled with nothing but old teeth. He walked inside. The door closed softly behind him. He didn't flinch. This was no longer a haunting. This was a return. On the walls, scratch marks formed circles, symbols he'd seen in the shaman's book. The room was alive, watching him without eyes. Every surface vibrated with quiet breath. In the bedroom, the mirror stood uncovered. It shimmered faintly. And in its surface, his double. No longer distorted, no longer hiding. It was perfect now. Same clothes, same face, same posture, but it smiled, and Jaehan did not. He stepped forward. The mirror fogged slightly, then cleared. The double raised its hand and beckoned, a soft gesture, inviting. And behind the double, within the mirrored apartment, stood others, shadows, figures, faces he recognized from the building, neighbors, the child from the 4th floor, the old woman from 15A, all standing still, all staring, all inside the mirror. And behind them, an altar, burned, incomplete. This was the gate. He understood now. The 14th floor wasn't haunted, it was unfinished. A spiritual limb severed from the real world. An orphaned room with a mirror for a heart. He removed the red thread from his wrist, untied it slowly, walked to the center of the bedroom where the floor bore the faint outline of a circle, chalk or ash, barely visible. He sat, crossed his legs, and placed the thread in front of him, and lit the candle he had brought. The instructions were clear. To seal the floor, he had to complete the ritual that failed decades ago, to finish the shaman's work. He began to chant. The words burned his throat, a language he had never spoken but that lived somewhere deep in his bones. The air thickened, the candle flame grew taller, and the mirror began to vibrate. The double stepped forward, pressed its hand to the glass. Jae-hun did the same, palm to palm, skin to surface. And then the mirror cracked, a single fracture, straight down the middle. From within, a voice spoke, his own. "If you close it, I disappear." He didn't answer. The double smile faded. "I'm stronger than you. I don't forget. I don't hesitate." The mirror pulsed. Cracks spread. The shadows inside began to move, reaching for the edges, clawing, crawling. The candle flickered violently. His breath grew short. The apartment groaned around him, but he didn't stop. He finished the chant and whispered the final line, "I remember the name of the gate." And the mirror shattered inward. Silence. A true, final silence. The air stilled. The shadows were gone. Only shards remained. And in each broken piece, no reflection looked back. Only dust. Jae-hun stood, shaking, exhausted. The door behind him opened on its own. And outside, the hallway was brighter, clean, empty. The 14th floor was fading. He stepped back into the elevator, pressed 13. This time it worked. The doors closed. And as he descended, he didn't see his reflection, only glass, clear. When he reached his real apartment, everything was as he had left it. No scratches, no movement in the mirrors, no sounds behind the walls, just silence. But it was a silence he trusted now, a silence that meant something was over, or so he thought. That night, just before sleeping, he glanced out the window. Across the street, in the other building, a man stood at the glass, not moving, not blinking, wearing the same hoodie, holding the same cup of coffee, and slowly, he waved. For the first time in weeks, Jae-hyun slept through the night. No knocking, no footsteps, no flickering lights or echoing voices, only stillness. When he woke, the sun was already high. Warmth filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden stripes across the floor. The apartment smelled like dust and sunlight, not blood, not mold, not burnt incense. And the mirrors? Silent, still, normal. He approached the bathroom cautiously, removed the black cloth. His reflection stared back, tired, gaunt, but his. It blinked when he did.
tilted its head with him, raised a hand when he did. No lag, no delay, no double. Just himself. He almost cried. That day, he left the apartment, walked through the neighborhood like a man waking from anesthesia. The noise of the city, the horns, the chatter, the distant barking felt sharp, almost offensive, but it was real. He sat on a park bench for an hour, drinking canned coffee and watching the leaves fall. When his phone buzzed, he checked it. A single message from a number he didn't recognize. They don't all make it back. No sender name, no history. He stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. But it stayed in the corner of his thoughts, a splinter he couldn't remove. That evening, curiosity returned. Not fear, not dread, just a gentle, gnawing curiosity. He needed to know how many had walked the 14th floor, how many had seen their reflection step out before them, how many had disappeared, quietly, without record, absorbed by a floor that shouldn't exist. He remembered the hallway, remembered something strange on the far wall across from his mirrored apartment, a panel covered in soot, half sealed behind rotting wallpaper. A wall that hid something. That night, at exactly 2:30 a.m., he returned. The elevator didn't resist him. The floor number wasn't visible, but it stopped just the same. Ding! The doors opened, and the 14th floor welcomed him again. This time it was quieter, dim, cool, but not hostile. Just solemn, like a room after a funeral. He walked down the hallway, past the familiar shadows, past the place where the mirrored apartment once stood. He turned toward the far end, and there it was, the panel. He peeled back the wallpaper. It came away like skin, and beneath he found names, hundreds of them, scratched into the concrete with nails, keys, knives, some etched deep, some shallow, some barely legible, some violent, gouged in wide, frantic strokes, all in Korean, some in English, a few in characters he couldn't recognize at all. He scanned them, not knowing what he was looking for, until he saw Park Jae-hyun. Scratched into the wall, not by him. The writing was crooked, uneven, carved before he had ever moved into the building. His blood ran cold, and beneath his name, more scratches. Someone had tried to erase it, but failed. He stepped back, looked around. The air was too still. The hallway had changed again, longer now, darker. The ceiling slanted slightly, the walls closed in. He turned to leave, but the elevator was gone. No doors, just wall. He reached forward, touched the concrete, cold, real. Then he heard the sound, scraping, behind him. He turned slowly. One of the names on the wall was rewriting itself, the letters moving, shifting, rearranging, becoming, "He is still here." Then another name appeared below, his name, again. But this time the letters bled, red streaks running downward like ink. He backed away, turned to run, but the hallway stretched further. The lights flickered out, and in the dark, voices, dozens, hundreds, all whispering over each other, all saying the same thing. "Don't forget us. Don't forget us. Don't forget us." He screamed, not out of terror, but out of grief, because he knew. These were the ones who had never come back, the ones who had gone into the mirror and lost themselves, who were never found, who were listed as missing, crazy, suicides, all because they looked too long.
When he finally found the elevator again, it was no longer silver. It was wooden, ancient, with talismans nailed into its frame. He stepped inside, pressed no button. The doors closed, the lights flickered, and it took him up to 15, then down to 13, then down to G. He stepped out, legs trembling. The doorman, Mr. Wu, stood nearby, staring at him with weary eyes. "You went back," the old man said. "I did." Mr. Wu didn't look surprised. "You saw the wall?" "I did." The doorman looked down. "I clean it sometimes, but the names always come back." "How many are there?" "Wu don't answer." He just said, "Some floors never get cleaned." Back in his apartment, Jae-hyun sat on the floor, hands shaking, not from fear, but from knowledge. This wasn't about him anymore. The mirror world didn't want just one person. It wanted witnesses. It wanted to be remembered. The forgotten ones, the trapped, needed someone to know they had lived and to say their names out loud so that it never stopped being real. So that night, he opened a notebook and began to write them. Every name he remembered from the wall, every face he had glimpsed, every neighbor who had vanished, line by line, even his own. And when he finished, the mirror across the room didn't reflect him, but it didn't reflect the double either. It reflected them, standing together, watching, waiting, peaceful. For now. The next morning, Jae-hyun woke with a single thought lingering in his mind. We stopped listening. It clung to him like the aftertaste of a bitter dream, not loud, not urgent, but constant, like background static under every word, under every step. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the small notebook filled with names. The pages didn't flutter, but the room felt like it breathed around them. Every name was a memory someone had refused to carry, a silence inherited, a shadow passed down. He thought of his family and the silence between them. Jae-hyun had never paid attention to his ancestors. He didn't go to the family grave during Chuseok, didn't bow before the altar his grandmother kept in her bedroom, didn't light incense when someone passed, only wore black and nodded when others did. He told himself it was a different world now, that rituals were old things, relics of simpler times, superstition dressed as tradition. But now he knew better. He called his mother that afternoon. She sounded tired, surprised to hear from him. They spoke stiffly at first, then gently, as if learning each other's voice again. "Do you still keep the altar?" he asked after a long pause. His mother hesitated. "No," she said, "not since Halmoni passed." "Why?" "She was the only one who remembered how. We just stopped. The bowls gathered dust, the photos faded. No one knew the names." He felt that splinter again, in his heart this time. "And what about her spirit?" he asked. "She's at peace," his mother replied, but her voice was thin, unsure. Was she? That night, Jae-hyun lit incense in his apartment. He didn't know the words, so he made up his own. He bowed 3 times and placed the notebook of names before the smoke and whispered, "I remember you." The flame of the incense curled sideways, then upright again. The air grew colder, but not hostile, just present. He whispered again, "You are not forgotten." Sleep came easier, but his dreams were not gentle. He was a child again, standing barefoot on a dirt floor in his grandmother's house. The walls were faded with scrolls. The altar glowed with candlelight. A woman, his Halmoni, stood with her back to him, whispering. He couldn't hear the words, just the tone, low, reverent, warning. Then she turned, and her face was not hers anymore. It was his own, mouth sewn shut, eyes weeping dust. She raised one hand and pointed behind him. He turned. There was a mirror there. In the mirror, the apartment, and behind him, standing over his sleeping body, was a shadow shaped like regret. He woke in a sweat. The incense had burned out, but the smoke remained in the air, coiling near the mirror, and written faintly in the residue on the glass, "They remember who forgets them." The next day, he took a bus out of the city, to the village where his grandmother was buried. He hadn't visited in years. The land was quieter there. The wind moved like old breath, and the trees bowed lower. He found the gravesite after an hour of wandering. Her tombstone was clean. Someone had come recently. But there were no offerings, no fruit, no rice, no lit candles, just dry weeds. He sat before it, and for the first time in his life, he spoke to her, not with ceremony, just with honesty. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't understand. I forgot the things you tried to teach us." A breeze passed over his shoulders. The trees rustled faintly, and in the hush between the leaves, he heard her voice, "Now you know." He stayed until dusk. Then, before leaving, he placed the notebook of names beside her stone, tied with red thread. A gift, a confession, a burden returned. When he returned to the city, the building felt different. Hwarang Tower loomed as always, but something about its presence had shifted, less heavy, less greedy. The elevator dinged as he entered the lobby, and for the first time, when he looked in its mirrored interior, his reflection stood alone. No shadow, no smile, no delay. Later that night, he received a package. No return address. Inside, a photograph. Old, worn, faded color. It showed the construction site of his building years ago. Still dirt, cranes, scaffolding. But in the photo's background stood something else. A small shrine, half buried, crumbling, forgotten. He turned the photo over. A date was written there in neat handwriting, and a message. "The ground remembers, even when you don't." He placed the photo beside the incense burner, lit another stick, and this time he said nothing. He simply listened to the silence, to the ghosts beneath his floor, to the ancestors who had waited so long to be remembered. And in that moment, he understood. This was never just about a cursed floor. It was about abandonment, spiritual debt left unpaid, and the only currency that mattered now was memory. It began with a dream. Not the surreal, fragmented kind that evaporated with sunlight, but a structured memory that didn't belong to him. In the dream, he stood beneath Hwarang Tower before it was built. The ground was bare, earth still raw, the city far in the distance. And in the center of the lot was a room without walls, a square traced in ash and twine, surrounded by 4 mirrors facing inward. At the center of the square sat a man, skin covered in talismans, mouth sewn shut with red thread. The wind screamed around them, though the trees did not move. Above, a crane hung suspended, frozen mid-construction. The man's eyes met Jae-yun's, and then the earth opened beneath him. He fell, awoke, and realized it hadn't been a dream. The next day, Jae-yun followed the feeling. Not a memory, not even intuition, just a pull, a gravity beneath his ribs, like something buried in his spine was trying to return to its origin. He rode the elevator down to B2, a level meant for maintenance only, locked to residents. But when he reached for the panel, the button lit on its own, and the elevator descended without permission. The doors opened to darkness. The air smelled of mildew and rust, but also incense, faint and sweet, like memory. He stepped out. No lights, just the dim green glow of a cracked exit sign pulsing overhead like a heartbeat. He passed old boiler rooms, metal doors warped with age, forgotten warning signs. And then he saw it. At the end of a narrow corridor, behind a bent metal gate, a single wooden room, freestanding, unattached to the structure around it. It didn't belong here, but it had been here longer than anything else. The door was sealed with wax and thread, but as he approached, the seals unspooled and the door opened with a sound like a breath being released. Inside, silence. A square room, walls of wood, no windows, and in the center, mirrors, 4 of them, facing inward, tall, thin, ancient. Their glass was dim and warm, like aged water, their frames wrapped in red cloth, tied with bells. And in the space between them, burned offering bowls, now cold. The floor bore a faint circle of soot. This was it, the mirror room, the place where the original ritual had taken place. A seal, long broken. He stepped inside. Immediately the temperature dropped, his breath fogged, and in the mirrors he did not appear, only the reflection of the room endlessly mirrored, 4 perspectives of the same place looping into each other like an echo. No faces, no shadows, just depth. He approached the center, knelt where the burnt offerings had once sat, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I'm here now." The room reacted. All 4 mirrors rippled as if stone had been dropped in each, and slowly faces appeared, not his own, dozens, some old, some young, some nearly forgotten, some familiar. His neighbors, the child from 4F, the woman from 15A, the shaman, and the other, the reflection that had stalked him for weeks. But this time, it did not move. It simply stood behind the others, still watching. A voice entered the room, not out loud, but inside his head. Many voices, layered, whispering in rhythm. The gate was never meant to stay open. You walked through, you carried us with you. Finish what the blood could not. Close the mirrors, give us silence. He understood now. The original shaman had died mid-ritual. The seal had never completed. The mirror room was left behind, not destroyed, not sanctified, only hidden.
And now its door had been reopened by him, by his ignorance, by his ancestral silence. He stood, walked to the first mirror. It showed a face, a man crying without sound. He touched the glass. It turned black. One by one, he walked to each mirror. Each reflected a different sorrow. A child alone in a hallway. A woman reaching through a mirror, fingers melting. An old man kneeling before an altar with no one to watch. And the last? It reflected him, but not now. A future self, older, empty-eyed, alone in a room filled with nothing but reflections of himself. He hesitated, then reached out. The glass cracked. The floor beneath him began to hum. The room vibrated. The soot rose from the floor, forming shapes in the air, symbols spinning, dissolving. The bells tied to the mirror frames jingled once, and the mirrors collapsed inward, soundless, like paper folding into ash. The walls dimmed, the air warmed, and the room was still. He turned to leave, but as he stepped into the hallway, the space behind him was already fading, like it had never been there, like it had never wanted to be seen again. Back at his apartment, Jae-yoon slept without dreams, and when he awoke, he found the photograph of the mirror room, one he never took, burned into the screen of his phone. Permanent, unremovable. Beneath it, a final message appeared. The room is gone. The door is closed. But we remember who closed it.
Jae-hyun awoke to stillness. No hum in the walls, no flickering bulbs, no whispers from unseen corners, just the gentle weight of morning, gray light creeping through blinds, the faint creak of old wood beneath his feet. It felt finished, complete, and yet deep in his chest something pulsed, slow, steady, ancient, a signal, a call, one that said, "You are not done yet." He moved through the apartment as if it were someone else's. Everything was untouched. The mirror in the hallway no longer shimmered. The bathroom reflected only what was present. Even the faint scent of mold that had once clung to the walls was gone. He should have felt peace, but peace wasn't the same as safety, and safety wasn't the same as freedom, because deep down he knew. He had sealed the gate, but he hadn't destroyed it, not truly. That night he didn't try to sleep. He sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the red string laid before him like a ritual line, and the last note from Halmione Hwa pressed into his palm. To finish it, you must go where they cannot follow. You must step through willingly. You must give what was always withheld. He understood now. The mirror world didn't just want his reflection. It wanted recognition, acknowledgement, a soul offered, not stolen. The previous victims had stumbled in blindly, been taken, replaced. But he had walked through the darkness, named it, faced it, and now he had one step left. At 3:14 a.m., the elevator dinged. He rose slowly, opened his front door. The hallway was empty, lit by a single flickering bulb, not with menace, but with mourning. He approached the elevator. Its doors were already open, waiting. No panel, no buttons. Just a mirror inside. One final threshold. He stepped in. As the doors slid shut, he did not flinch, he did not cry, he did not pray. He simply closed his eyes and whispered, "Take me to the end." There was no movement, no sound, no floor count blinking above, just silence, then darkness, then the feeling of falling, not downward, but inward, a spiraling descent into memory. He opened his eyes and found himself standing in his own apartment, but not quite. The furniture was older, the air heavier. Photos lined the shelves, pictures of people he did not recognize, all staring forward with blank eyes. On the coffee table, an open book. Inside, his life. Written in neat, impossible detail, everything he'd done since arriving at Huarong Tower. Each page ended with the same sentence. He didn't choose it until now. A sound echoed from the bedroom. Footsteps, measured, soft. He turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was himself. The double, whole, solid, not decaying, not monstrous, just him, but stripped of all hesitation, all fear, all softness. It smiled, not cruelly, not mockingly, but knowingly, like to say, "You finally understand." They faced each other in silence, two sides of a single coin, the man who ran and the man who stayed. Jae-hyun took a breath, then stepped forward, into the bedroom, into the mirror, into himself. What happened next cannot be described as pain. It was undoing, a quiet unspooling of identity, not death, but surrender, of ego, of memory, of separation. And in that moment, something ancient closed its eyes in satisfaction. He found himself floating, not in water, not in light, just in space without direction. And in that space, he heard the voices, all of them, the ones from the wall, the ones behind the mirrors, not crying, not pleading, just speaking. "We see you. We accept. You chose." And then the sound of bells, soft, distant, fading. He opened his eyes, back in the elevator, alone, but different. The mirrored walls showed his reflection, no second shadow, no delay, but the man inside was changed, older, sadder, still. The elevator rose slowly, floor by floor, until it stopped. G. The doors opened. The lobby was empty. No doorman, no whispers, no presence. He stepped out into a world that no longer watched him, because he had crossed over and come back. He walked outside. The city smelled like rain, clean, temporary, alive. That night, in his apartment, he hung a mirror across from the window, and on the glass he tied a single red string, not to bind, but to remember. The elevator doesn't stop at 14 anymore. It hasn't in weeks. No flickers, no stutters, no sudden jerks between 13 and 15.
The panel shows only what's meant to be there. The digital display glides smoothly past the space where the cursed floor once whispered from beneath the building's skin. To anyone else, there never was a 14th floor. And for most residents of Hwarang Tower, life moved on. The missing names returned to rosters. The building's eerie aura lifted, unnoticed, like fog burned away by a sunrise. No one spoke of the corpse wedged between the floors. The girl who vanished and returned with dust in her hair laughed again in the playground. The mirrors in the lobby were replaced. Clean, shining, empty. But Jae-han remembered. He remembered all of it, and that was the price. Not screams, not violence, not death, just memory. Sharp, private, inescapable. Some nights he would ride the elevator to the 13th floor and just wait. He would stare at the blank space on the panel, the place where the 14 had once glowed red for a single second. But it never came back. The doors never opened to that forgotten hallway. The breathless silence never returned. All that was left was the hum of electricity, the soft click of numbered buttons, the smooth slide of polished doors. The building had accepted his offering and sealed the mirror world away. Not forever. Nothing spiritual is ever forever. But for now, it was quiet. He started taking walks in the early morning, grocery runs, errands. Sunlight on his skin again, the breeze through the city. He felt different, not freer, not lighter, just aligned, as though something in him had been twisted his whole life and only now clicked back into place. There was still silence inside him, but now it was ancestral, peaceful, not absence, but presence. Sometimes he dreamed of the mirror room, but only as a ruin, collapsed wood, shattered glass, burned red string coiled in ash. In those dreams, he wasn't haunted. He was a witness, someone who saw something no one else dared to see and chose not to look away. He lit incense on the 1st of every month now, placed fruit beside his small altar, built from old bricks and faith he was still learning how to carry. He didn't know the rituals perfectly, but the spirits didn't mind. They didn't want perfection. They wanted remembrance. One afternoon, a new tenant moved into 13B. A student, young, bright-eyed, wearing headphones and dragging a suitcase. Jae-han passed her in the hallway and gave a polite bow. She smiled, thanked him for holding the door. She would never know, would never understand what had happened in the walls of that unit. And that was okay, because the elevator didn't stop there anymore. Because the door, the real one, was closed. And yet, late at night, just after 3 a.m., when the wind was still and the city paused, he sometimes heard it. A ding, soft, distant, echoing from nowhere. Just once. Never followed by footsteps, never followed by knocks. Just that single sound hanging in the dark like a held breath. The elevator doesn't stop at 14 anymore, but sometimes it remembers that it once did.